How you doing today? My name is Leonard Gibbs, and I'm going to speak a little bit about the income inequality and the effects on business and society. Now, we all know that the income gap between the richest 1% and the lowest bottom 20 is very wide, as well as the income gap between the middle class and the top 1%. But we have to understand how this happened. Before the 1970s, there was an even keel of uh, income distribution. Then, around 1970 or so, when a lot of skilled positions were in demand, there were a lot of people who didn't go to college. So the educated skilled positions were few and far in between, and those people who got them had a lot more money than the lower unskilled people. Now, in the 1980s, a lot of companies went multinational, which meant they they were global, and globalization took over. And when these companies decided to start doing business overseas, they saw that a huge number of people were working for lower pay, and that helped their bottom line a lot with lower pay. So those lower skill sets came back into America. Also, technology is another reason why there's an income gap widening between the top 1% and the lower 20%, the working class. Now, a lot of robots, a lot of technology is replacing the jobs that it may have taken two or three people to do. Those jobs are done now by robots, so it only takes one. Now, I was speaking earlier about the 70s and globalization in the 80s. And when you think about the income gap, we go back to census, the income gap growth from 1949 through 1979, the top 5% grew 86% during that 30-year period. And the bottom 20% grew an astounding 116%. This was all before globalization. So from 1979 to 2003, there had been a shift. So the top 5% income earners, their growth was at 68%, while the bottom 20% only grew in income 3.5%. Now that is amazing when you think about what's going on today. And of course, it disproportionately affects African Americans, because from 1972 to 2017, in the last census, the rate of growth of income for African Americans was only $9,000. So when we say that the income gap is widening, it is widening. Just to give you a look see at how the income gap is widening, we can look at some companies' CEOs and the marginal worker. So we'll look at CVS. Their CEO, Larry Merlo, his total compensation is about $22 million for 2015. Compare that to the median worker who works at CVS. They're only making about $27.9. So when we look at that, we have to say, well, how does this affect business? Well, it's going to affect business because if you don't pay people a living wage, what's going to eventually happen is a lot of people are going to start their own businesses, and that's just going to help them. But if you don't pay a living wage, you can't pay for health care. People can't pay for child care, groceries, gas, everything that we take for granted. And once that happens, people start working 2 and 3 jobs. Businesses are going to suffer because there's going to be no disposable income for people to buy things from that company. So, in a nutshell, this income gap widening is a serious problem because you can't have somebody who's uber rich and you can't have a society where nobody makes money. When that happens, there'll be chaos. So, we don't have answers to fix it now, but one definite answer would be to pay a living wage. And that's just my commentary. So, thank you.